Welcome to today's episode of The Square. Today, we are going to be talking all things visual effects and having a curious conversation with Colin Campbell. Colin, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for inviting me.
And you have been the compositor or senior compositor on over 50 feature films. You are on the National Visual Effects Society board, and you're the chair for the Texas section. That is a huge amount of visual effects experience.
Well, I mean, you can see
I've got just a little bit in there. You're a little ahead of me. So tell me a little bit about your journey into visual effects.
It started way long ago. It kind of explains some of the gray. When I was a little kid, like all little kids, fascinated with dinosaurs. Parents bought the dinosaur books and everything, and you're like, wow, big lizards and things like that. And with that, you watch all, the dinosaur movies, things of that. I grew up in Ardmore, Oklahoma, just up the road a little bit. So we watched, we got all the Saturday afternoon movies out of Dallas. And this is when you only had like 3 channels to watch, kind of thing. And Saturday, you'd get the Abbott and Costello movies and things like that. And you'd get Frankenstein and Dracula. But every so often, you'd get King Kong, Mighty Joe Young, Godzilla, something like that. And so, of course, if you're fascinated with dinosaurs, you clue in on, those things. And as a kid, I read this magazine while everyone else was reading, comic books and getting their Spider-Man crushes on and that sort of thing. I was reading Famous Monsters of Filmland. So, and it was just this guy, he started in the late 50s, early 60s. Forrest Ackerman started this magazine, and it would just cover monster movies, Oh,
wow.
And so one day I was flipping through the new issue, and one of my favorite movies at the time was 1 Million Years BC. But unfortunately, I was watching for the dinosaurs, not the ladies in the furry bikinis, which was like, Dad was like, yeah, kid, let's watch dinosaur movies, But anyway, I was flipping through, and the Triceratops was always my favorite dinosaur and all. And there was a photo in the magazine just flipping over, and here was a picture of this guy. He's kind of balding and all, but he's holding the Triceratops in his hands. It looks like it's maybe 1-2 feet long or whatever. And as a kid, you never really think how they get on the screen or whatever. They just say, it could be like a giant robot for all, and all that sort of thing and all. But here he was, and I was like, how does that work? How is he? Because it was that dinosaur. It has such a distinct look to it and everything.
It piqued your curiosity.
Exactly. And I read the name in the caption, Ray Harryhausen. And so I was like, okay. And a couple of issues later, was a promotional issue for Golden Voyage of Sinbad. And they did a whole article on just that one film. But yet here was a picture of that same balding guy holding this little winged demon-looking creature and that sort of thing. But in that article, it explained how the whole stop-motion animation process
how he had done it.
Exactly. And it was just like, literally, I could hear like the click of the light switch going on in my head. It's like, it's just like cartoons, only in 3 dimensions and that sort of thing. And so the whole idea of digging up dinosaur bones and dinosaur eggs and that sort of thing just went out the window, because it's like, why dig up dead ones when you can make them come to life, with little rubber puppets and stuff.
Absolutely.
So that was the start of my fascination, and kind of like my gateway drug into visual effects.
That's when you got bit, and it was all VFX after that.
Exactly. Whether it was spaceships or what have you.
As I was getting ready for this conversation, there was a quote from Picasso, anything you can imagine is real. As a VFX artist, what does that mean to you?
Now with the advent of digital technology, you can do anything in a virtual space. You're unencumbered by, the forces of gravity, or, when you can do anything. It's up to the imagination of the writer, the director, and the storytellers.
You said storyteller. Let me ask you, I know you definitely would think of yourself as an artist. Do you think of yourself as a storyteller?
Not particularly, no. A contributor for sure. That because we're hired to help the director achieve
Visualize
to achieve
story.
their vision, the story they want to tell. Yeah.
Is there this? We'll talk a little bit about the future of the VFX industry in a minute, but is there? I can't imagine anything you couldn't create through VFX, and that's probably a viewpoint that has come from continuing to be blown away by what people come up with next. Do you still get that spark that you saw with the original dinosaur figure, and you saw Ray's name for the first time? Do you still get that spark when you see things? You're like, oh man, that's incredible. I can't. I would never have thought of being able to do that.
Yeah. Lately, not as much as maybe back in the late '80s or early '90s when like Jurassic Park and Terminator 2, The Abyss, when those movies, because then we did start doing things that we couldn't do before with physical means, models and miniatures and that sort of thing, or we could do them to a whole new level of credibility. And so when you see something like, as good as Ray's dinosaurs looked and things like that, all of a sudden you saw Jurassic Park and brain explosion. It's like, oh my gosh, those things are living and breathing dinosaurs,
It's funny looking back and watching movies from 10, 20, or even 30 years ago. Some of the visual effects, you're like, oh God, that was so corny. I could do that on my iPhone. And some of them like still hold up. Like I think of some of the Star Wars ones, but you mentioned miniatures. I think, where do you think the line gets drawn, if there is a line, between visual effects and miniatures, or the practical side of effects?
I think they're all visual effects. I mean, because before computer graphics, came along, that's what it was. It was, there was like the whole special effects category.
Right.
And then there had to be a determination of visual effects, because special effects is anything you can do live on set now.
Right.
Rain, snow, flames, things of that nature. Visual effects is the things that, usually comes in a post-production aspect.
Yeah.
And so those were the things that the trick photography, as they would say. So, I mean, there were like, visual effects using, smokes and mirrors, and that sort of stuff on set, like I, referenced Darby O'Gill and the Little People. That was all in front of the camera right then and there. So in a way you could say it was special effects, but there was all the forced perspective things going on. And
say Charlie Chaplin is like one of those people I think was incredible with this kind of thing.
Yeah.
And a lot of people don't realize how many of his pieces have so many different layers, even though they didn't have computers and whatnot to do it.
My hat off to them figuring out how, well, we do this if we just like angle a mirror 45 degrees to the camera and we scratch a little bit of the reflective surface off and we can, hit the mic. We can film through that hole something happening and then something else is reflecting, all that kind of stuff. It's like, who figured that out, in the 1920s?
Yeah.
My gosh.
It's incredible how the VFX medium gives us the ability to take worlds and characters that only exist in our heads. We were talking about you being part of the conduit that brings directors' visions to life and their stories to life. You were talking earlier how you help bring together a director's vision or a story through your art with compositing and visual effects. It seems like it's such an incredibly powerful medium compared to, things that just have zero VFX in it. Why is the digital have such an impact?
Audiences want to see something, that they haven't, seen before. So, I mean, there've been, wonderful films that had no visual effects in them. I look at, a number of Hitchcock movies, things of that nature. Then you look at, a film like Citizen Kane, which is supposed to be one of the greatest films ever made, has visual effects in it. Matte paintings and glass shots and miniatures, and people don't realize it because they were executed so well. But it seems lately we have been, and by lately, probably going back to when Star Wars came out, the first one, blockbuster has kind of changed audiences' diet, and so they always want bigger, better, more, and that may not necessarily be better for the storytelling process.
At the risk of alienating someone, I won't say a specific film, but I definitely think we can all imagine films that were like, oh, that was all VFX. There was no story. There was nothing in it. And it just, I think there's a dance that happens when visual effects and story are working in concert together that have a much greater impact than certainly VFX by itself. But to your point, it's one of those things where being able to escape reality a little bit and be immersed in a world that is only in your mind has a connection with us as humans that very few things do.
Yeah. I mean, and I can, you can trace that back to the silent days looking at The Lost World, which was, people, back in the 1920s thought those dinosaurs were real.
Yeah.
I mean, we look at it now and it's all kind of herky-jerky and things. And then along comes King Kong, which, from start to finish is really, that's just a roller coaster. It's a little bit of a slow burn at the beginning, but once they land on that island, it's just pure pulp adventure. There's no, I mean, Kong, you can't really say he's a bad guy, in the terms of Darth Vader, because he has no bad motives or what. He just fell in love with his little, his little Barbie doll.
Yeah.
But, and he was just doing what he wanted to do, but he had no evil intentions or what have you.
Yeah.
But yeah, it was just, straight pure fun from start to finish.
I would imagine a lot of people think of VFX and they have that idea of the big blockbuster movies or the Hollywood and entertainment industry. And certainly that's where I think a lion's share of the work happens. But there are a lot of other industries that utilize VFX. Certainly architecture is one of them. What are some of the others?
Well, just, the straight animated film,
Yep.
has visual, whether it was 2D or 3D animation, medical imaging, military designing, things like that. Yeah, there are a lot. I mean, anything that uses the same tools, it's all visual effects.
Right.
It may not be classified as such, but how can you say the modeling that you all do, for your structures and things is any different than the modeling done for a set extension in a feature film, or I have not seen anything, do you all do like simulations for foliage and trees and things like that? Yeah, the same thing as in feature films and stuff. So how can you say what you all are doing is not visual effects and a lot of the artists, cross over, as well. So,
well, and I think back to that quote about Picasso, anything you can imagine is real. It's that same idea. It doesn't have to just be encased in a story. It can be, like you said, it can be a building. It can be, military application. It can be really anything.
Sure.
Is there a reason you feel like VFX is important to the design of our world, whether it's a building or a movie or a TV?
One, yeah, it's definitely, it allows us to wonder more. I mean, you think of, any recent construction, like opera houses and things like that. I mean, we're no longer are buildings just big straight edge skyscrapers that go to the sky. We've got really creative angles and curves. I mean, it's almost, sculptural in a way.
Yeah.
And I think, that allows people, to kind of get more involved in their environment,
The Vision Pro just came out recently, and I kind of think of those and the headsets that have led to that. VR, as you know, VR has been around for a while, but it's only been in the last really 5 to 10 years that it's kind of had this explosion of interest and investment in technology and in content. And it's one of those things we've seen, a lot of times, myself included, a lot of people outside of the architecture and design industry have a really difficult time understanding a floor plan or even, sectionals or even renders and understanding scale. But when you're able to put on that headset and immerse yourself in a world and walk up to a virtual desk or, view an opera house, and you can start to make more informed decisions and imagine a little bit more.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I could easily see, a client, when you look at a flat, and I don't know anything about architecture, to be honest and all, but I think, you look at a flat blueprint and you can only imagine in your mind's eye how this is going to look, extruded and lofted and all that kind of stuff. But then when you can actually put on the goggles and you can see okay, that space is looking a little more confined than I planned or envisioned. Is there any way we can open it up a bit? Things like that. Can we, move desks around a little bit, things like that. Being able to see something in a more tactile 3D environment is definitely a big enhancement.
While we're talking, one of the things that I noticed was the pin that you're wearing, which is from A Trip to the Moon, which it's kind of widely considered the first visual effects film that exists right now. It's from George Méliès, right?
Yes.
Tell me a little bit about that pin.
This is the logo that we've chosen for the Visual Effects Society because Méliès is always kind of considered to be the godfather or the grandfather of visual effects. And whether or not, a lot of his films don't exist anymore. They just lost to history, unfortunately. But this is one of the more fanciful ones that still has been found in its entirety. And the moon with the rocket poking in the eye is such an iconic cinema history image.
Well, and this was, now. Speaking of imagining, this was long before flight or anything. This was, the idea of going to the moon was very similar to the idea of having dinosaurs roaming the earth.
Yeah.
It was that extraordinary, that unreachable.
Yeah, it's very, very Jules Verne-ish.
Jules Verne, yeah.
Very much.
So tell me a little bit more about the Visual Effects Society.
The Visual Effects Society, or VES, is a honorary society. We are a 501c3 educational charity, I guess would be, even though we don't go out and solicit donations and that sort of thing. But we are a nonprofit, so I guess that's why we would be classified as a charity. But yeah, we were an honorary society in that you're not invited to join, but there are certain criteria that people have to achieve for their application. So it's not like, oh, here's my money, you're in.
Yeah.
It's not a visual
There's
effects
a review
thing.
process.
Yes.
And I can tell you from personal experience, it's extensive. It's not something I'm going to sit down for 10 minutes and fill out an application.
Right.
And it requires 2 letters of recommendation from current VES members. Is that right?
Correct. Yeah.
So why the, I guess, barrier to entry almost?
It's, we want to make sure that we get people who are career visual effects professionals, and not just fanboys or something of that, or fangirls. That's not, but we want to make sure that we've got career people who are interested in being members, that sort of thing.
One of the things that I love about VES is the community and the support that you offer. Talk to me a little bit about that.
Well, we have through various committees and things that we offer, educational support, venue, things of that nature. There is the camaraderie, a lot of social programs and things that go on as well. One of the benefits we have that was just recently put together is this huge health and wellness, things that are coming popular now. That's all free to the members.
The majority of VES are freelancers, correct?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
So it's by default, they don't have the same benefits that people working at a large corporation would have.
Right. Yeah.
So there's those added benefits for VES.
Yeah. We offer access to a healthcare plan. We don't, pay for it or anything like that. But as a large collective group of people, we can then, the provider, looks at us as if we were a business or something, but here's a bunch of customers, basically, kind of thing.
How did you find VES?
I found out a very interesting story. The VES actually was kind of conceived back in the mid 1990s, and I'd been in the business since 1987. And there was an ad in a magazine, and I don't think it was Cinefex. I think it was something else that kind of came and went.
Yeah.
But there was an ad for seeking visual effects made for this new, society.
Yeah.
And so I called up the number they gave, and I spoke with the fellow whose name I will not mention. You'll find out. I called him up and said, yes, I'm interested in joining, your society or what have you. And he's like, oh, well, you've got to have, 5 years of experience and all that. Check.
Yep.
Oh, you've got to have 2 letters of endorsement from, and I'm like, I think I can get those.
Yep.
Check. and he went down the whole litany. It's pretty much the same stuff you have to do now, work, so, give a work history, to prove your 5 years and that sort of thing. So I was like, check, 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 kind of deal. And then finally he came up and he just said, oh, well, right now we're just looking for the celebrities of the visual effects, the big names.
You have to be a name.
Exactly. And I'm like, well, why did you even put
it in the magazine?
In the magazine, if you had like select names that you were going for, that sort of thing. And during the whole course of the conversation, I could just kind of tell he didn't want to be on the phone with me anyway. Fast forward to I guess it was around 2000. Whenever Eric Roth took over as the executive director and all, when I heard that he was taking over and this other guy was stepping down.
Yeah.
And that's saying that politely. But when Eric was taking over that day, I put in my application, and I for my letters of endorsement, I got 2 of those celebrities that he was saying that he was going for, So
write the letters.
Yeah. So I was fortunate. I've got Dennis Murin and Ken Ralston were really nice enough to write my endorsements and all. And so I got right in, and I've been a member, in good standing ever since.
So there's there's being a member, and then there's you, because you've not only and this is a little bit behind the scenes, but you've not only been a member, like I said at the beginning, you're a national board member, but you have been fighting hard because there's certain requirements to have, to be considered a section, the Texas section. Mm-hmm. And you've been fighting hard for years to see that happen. And just recently, as of this last year, it happened at the end of this last year. Why is this important to you?
Because for me, ever since I went to school in San Antonio at Trinity University, and I'd kind of kept an eye on, that was when they first, back then in the 80s, we're talking about the Third Coast.
Yes.
And the Third Coast never really materialized, but, one can hope. And so I did what everybody did, you graduate, spent a couple of years earning some money, loaded up the car, moved to LA, and
that's where you have to be to do anything in film.
Yeah. And I got extremely lucky and got in the business, got my foot in the door and just started the snowball rolling. But I always kept my eye on Texas.
Yeah.
Could something ever happen to Texas? Now, at that time, to be in visual effects, it required big fancy camera rigs, tied to computers and things. And so it really only happened in California.
Yeah.
And Texas focused on live action film. Unfortunately, that's where they just got stuck in that
these
mindset.
Silos.
Yeah. And when things went digital, games came along, and Texas is very big in the game, solid game industry we have here, and things like Corgan and Lockheed Martin has their own CG department as well and all. But Texas never really seemed to cop to the idea that now visual effects didn't require all these big cameras and stuff. And they seemed like, to me at least, they love to have a film crew come out to their quaint little town and shoot a Hallmark Christmas movie there, and then everything would wrap, and let's try and get the next one. Whereas, visual effects is now an industry.
Yeah.
It's a global industry. And if you stay and watch the credits of any, Marvel film or what have you, of all
so many people.
Yeah. And that's just the visual effects department,
And they're all over the world.
Yeah, exactly. And every one of those names is a job that's not happening in Texas.
Yeah.
So it has been my vision to try and get our piece of that pie, here.
That idea of the Third Coast, and I know so much of visual effects is freelance, and so with COVID happening and making the idea of remote work so much more kind of mainstream, it opens that up even more for VFX artists who are living in Dallas and working on projects that could be all over the world, literally.
Sure.
But are there still barriers to overcome for Texas to have a more thriving visual effects industry?
I think the biggest barrier is the tax incentives.
Mm.
And we all know that plays a heavy hand in where work gets sent. And one is part of, which is kind of like the vision of having our section here, is having people start thinking about Texas as being part of that conversation. As visual effects, like, wow, there's enough people there to have a section, know.
And they can take advantage of X tax incentive.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So our tax incentive may not be quite as lucrative as some other locations, Canada or, even Atlanta, what have you. But what Texas does have is a very business-friendly environment.
Mm-hmm.
So the tax incentives really favor the big studios.
Yeah.
So anything that the effects company gets, they have to turn over to the big studio. So, and that would probably be the case here as well. But the good thing, Texas does not have a corporate income tax, and it does not have a personal income tax. So even though our overall film incentive is not as lucrative or whatever for the big studio, they get something.
Yeah.
And then just, if an established effects company wanted to open up a branch here in Texas, whether they get their incentive or not, they still get the incentive of not having to pay a corporate income tax, and maybe they can structure, some other favorable deals for real estate, things of that nature and all. And then we all know as being an artist, not having a state income tax, that's an incentive for us
100%.
as well.
You get to keep more of your money.
Exactly. So to me, that's a win-win-win for everybody, as opposed to a win for the studio and a lose-lose for the effects house and the artist.
We'll cut this part of the conversation out and start sending it to companies in LA that are looking, Sony and whatnot.
Yeah, please.
So let's talk about the larger VFX industry. What are some challenges? I'm certain, AI is one of them. What are some challenges that VFX faces as an industry?
Right now, I think a big challenge is, and it goes back to what we were talking about earlier during the storytelling process, it's like, have we plateaued?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, we keep doing more and more, and like, okay, let's have a movie with a big monkey, and let's have a movie with a big lizard. Now let's have a movie with a big monkey and a big lizard, and now we've got the second movie with with more big monkeys and more big lizards.
We're going to introduce a squirrel.
Here exactly. So it's just like, have we reached the point to where we're just, throwing a lot of eye candy at the audience and not really giving them any substance? And I think that's what the studio heads who greenlight these films, that's what they're looking at. What puts butts in seats and all that. And there is still, a part of the audience that wants a good story. And I'll point to the recent Planet of the Apes films, because I just got through watching the trilogy with the new one getting ready to come out. A lot of effects, but there was story there as well. And even though it wasn't deep science fiction, there's something there for your brain to hook on to. I mean, it kind of predicted, the whole COVID thing, with the, how the disease spread from airport to airport. And all. So, there's a lot there to, a lot of meat, on the bones,
So really, it sounds like what you're saying is the VFX industry stands ready to take those visions and give them flesh, but they need some of those unique and creative story-based ideas. To really advance the industry as a whole.
Right. Yeah. Just, give us something. I mean, give us superheroes and we'll give you back superheroes. And the entire third act of the movie will be nothing but Superman slugging it out with Zod, crumbling buildings and that sort of thing. Or we can, do really interesting films, that like Interstellar, things like that. Maybe not the greatest science fiction movie in the world, but there was something there beyond just spaceships, shooting each other up in space.
Well, it's funny. It's kind of coming full circle because, there's story, I think, was present, but maybe took a little bit of a secondary role with things like, George's films, and then and the visual effects really carried a lot of it. And then certainly, there's obviously a lot of story wrapped in the Star Wars and Star Trek and the science fiction series that are kind of milestones for the genre. But I think of films like Interstellar, and you think about all the visual effects, but it was so it wasn't visual effects for visual effects' sake. It was
Right.
in service of the story, and it's kind of come back around to that idea of it has to have a great story to be a great visual effects film.
Yes, yes.
And we talked a little bit about AI, or I mentioned AI. What is that? Is it seen kind of as a tool to help? Is it seen as a job taker?
Personally, I am not a fan of the nomenclature AI,
Fair enough.
because it is not intelligent.
Sure.
It only does, spits back what you tell it to do.
Fair enough. So the generative AI side of things.
Yes, yes. Machine learning, which is an aspect of AI, I see that as being a huge tool. So me as a compositor, I look at, one of my biggest banes is lazy blue screen photography, things like that. And of course, every director wants they're wiping back and forth between the final comp and the raw blue, and they're like, oh, you didn't get that hair, go back and get that hair, kind of thing. So if I can have set all of that up through machine learning, for the frame one, or and if there's like some odd camera move so the lighting changes, then you set keyframes for it to hit, but just set those up and then literally hit the go button and then let the software go through and do those blue screen extractions. By all means,
absolutely
do that. If it takes away part of my job, you can have it. Kind of thing. And I'll definitely fill in on making things look prettier.
Well, it gives you the opportunity to work on the things that are more important.
Yes, exactly.
Are there, looking at the VFX industry 5-10 years down the road, what do you see?
I see things moving more towards, maybe not towards the generative AI thing. The scary thing I see is that as this machine learning and stuff lets us do our jobs faster and more efficient and that sort of thing, to me it seems like, okay, let's just fill the picture with more, kind of thing. So if you think you're getting a lot of visual effects now, just wait till what's coming, 5 years from now. Because, it's like nature abhors a vacuum, and so we've just made more room for, to pour things into.
Is there something you would tell someone, in fact, we literally right now have a job description opening for a production intern, and a big portion of their job is going to be learning VFX work. So for somebody that's just starting out in school, words of wisdom that you have for them?
I would say, first and foremost, study filmmaking in general. I mean, because even though you're doing architectural viz here, you're still making a short film. It's still storytelling. You're editing and putting shots together and things of that nature. So study composition, image composition, color theory, all of those things, how color affects mood, things of that nature. Study lighting. So just all those generalities, will help you. That's your foundation that you're going to build on whatever industry you decide to go into. So study that. Don't just think, I love the last Spider-Man movie, so I'm only going to watch Spider-Man movie and that's going to be my training. It's like, no, all of that is based on, film theory and storytelling. So definitely study that. And then, it's not all about hardware, because it's, interchangeable, whether you're dealing with After Effects or Nuke or 3D Studio or Maya or Unreal Engine. You're never going to get to pick and choose what you want to work in. So learn the basics and then kind of keep an eye on what you would like to do, that sort of thing. And then move towards, whatever industry you want to get into.
All right. Last question. I can't let you leave without you giving me your top. I won't give you a specific number. Let's say 2 or 3 or 4 visual effects films that just for you specifically just stand out as classics or really important.
Obviously the original King Kong from 1933, because that was just so groundbreaking for that time. 2001 A Space Odyssey was in terms of photo real, visual effects, things of that nature. And God, I want to say Anaconda, but that's not. But no. Gosh, the third one, that's really tough. I think just in terms of its effect and its impact on our industry, overall, just, the original Star Wars.
Star Wars,
yeah.
Well, Colin, I can't thank you enough for being here. This has been a fascinating conversation. Thank you so much for coming and having it with me.
You're welcome. Thank you for inviting me.
And thank you so much for watching. If you want to learn more about VES or Colin, we'll put links down in the description below, and make sure to check out the next episode of The Square.